Oh, gee. Okay. Well, I'm glad to be coming to South Korea. I think it'd be a lovely place to go, considering we had the book translated into Korean a long time ago, but we've never managed to get there. So I'm looking forward to coming to Korea. And so personally, my background has been very much from a movement perspective for a long time. I've been I used to do some work with Vladimir Yanda. So my original background was the Yanda background, which I got at Queensland University when I was a student. And then also Vladimir was doing a sabbatical and then doing some teaching at Queensland University while I was on teaching staff there. So I've had the chance to teach with Vladimir Yanda. Right. So my background is very much from looking at from a manual therapy background, very much from most Australian physiotherapists, a manual therapy, looking at Maitland-orientated background and an exercise background. So that's the standard physiotherapy background that I was brought up with in Australia. But then I was working at Queensland University on the teaching staff, in the clinical student supervision, and we had the opportunity to work with we started looking at the Yanda approach to a large extent, looking at sort of movement and movement control, and then I had the and when Vladimir Yanda was doing a sabbatical teaching at Queensland University, I had the opportunity to teach with him. So one of my mentors I've had the chance to teach with, and then I managed to catch up with work with Shirley Salmon. I spent some time with her in America, in St. Louis, at her clinic, and had some time working with her. And then because the Shirley Salmon's background managed to fill in some of the holes in the Yanda background. The Yanda background was very much look for the restrictions that are causing movement control compensations, and then mobilizing the restrictions and doing strengthening. But strengthening didn't always work, and mobilizing the restrictions wasn't always the answer. And Shirley Salmon's approach was a little bit different. Her background was from a neuro point of view, so she did not come from a manual therapy and mobilizing restrictions background. Her idea was looking at movement and movement control. So Shirley Salmon's approach dovetailed in with the Yanda approach very nicely. Yanda was looking at the restriction side of things. Shirley Salmon was looking at the movement control side of things. And we had the opportunity at Queensland University when I was teaching there to blend them together into our undergraduate work to a certain extent. And that was at the same time as the research was starting into the local stabilizers. So I sort of had the opportunity to work from a Yanda and Salmon combination, looking at the restrictions and also looking at the movement control side of it, which was very straightforward, basically at the time. And then also the local muscle system control from the neurophysiology of pain. And then when I moved to the UK, I started teaching some courses integrating the local muscle control work with a bit of the Yanda and the Salmon sort of things together. Then over time, the research blended in together. There was a lot more research on the neurophysiology of pain and the neurophysiology of movement and how pain changes the neurophysiology of movement. And so that's where the kinetic control framework really developed when I was living and working in the UK. And we had Shirley Salmon come over to some of our conferences there. We had Yanda speak at one of our conferences in the UK as well. So we sort of kept those links, those background links, but we did a lot more development and also trying to make the whole concept of assessing for movement control a little bit more clinician friendly by making it a little bit more structured than the Yanda approach was very structured, but didn't do the movement control. Shirley Salmon's movement control was very generalized and looking at movement, and then but it wasn't structured enough for manual therapists, and so we made that a little bit more structured for manual therapists to put clinical steps in place. And so the kinetic control framework has really developed a lot from those backgrounds and a manual therapy background, and then looking at the neurophysiology of pain-related changes to motor control and the movement. And then Sarah Mottram and I, we published a paper in 2002, and then the book in 2012, looking at classifying muscle function in terms of local stabilizers and global stabilizers and global mobilizers. So giving 3 functional classifications of muscle, and then looking at sort of retraining the movement control deficiencies or the changes in those. And now it's moved on a lot more from just the pain to looking at movement health. And so our framework now is looking at movement efficiency. So you don't have to have pain first. Our aim is now to look at movement control, movement efficiency, looking at how some of our lifestyle habits change the way we move, how some of our functional activities, our work situations. And so looking at sort of how movement is a general thing, and then from looking at movement control and movement efficiency, we don't have to wait for people to get pain. We can start trying looking at maybe lost movement choices, maybe looking at how movement might change, and then some people will develop changes in how they move without having developed pain, but those changes are lost options. And then so restoring the full range of options of movement control parameters. And then so that's where the kinetic control framework is at the moment. And then building in a clinical reasoning framework to sort of, making them, when do we start with more local muscle control of segmental translation? When do we start with more global movement range control, for example? Okay, so a clinical reasoning framework to make some of those decisions, and we build that into our training process as well. So that's sort of it in a bit of a nutshell, a bit of the history and where we've tried to develop it. And so from looking at the very basics of restrictions and stretch and strength and restrictions and compensation, we've now moved into motor control, but also movement efficiency and movement health. So thinking in the same way that and our goal is somewhere along the line, in the same way that people will go to a dentist every 6 months or 12 months for a dental check to prevent problems from coming on. I think the physiotherapy and the physical therapy world can get to the stage where people will come to us for a movement health screening or a movement efficiency screening, and we can find sort of problems that are starting before they turn into pathology. And that would be the future where we can go, looking at sort of you come to a physical therapist or a physiotherapist for a movement health examination. So let's be more proactive and not wait for everything to fall apart, but looking at sort of trying to find problems before they turn into pathology.